Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me for the third magnificent time is the awesome Bradley Green. Brad, how are you going today?
I am doing fantastic.
Good.
You just reminded me this was my third time, so I am very lucky to be a part of this, be a part of the journey that you have taken us on over the last couple of years. I've really enjoyed all of your podcast and look forward to speaking with you today.
It's no problem at all, Brad. We've all benefited from your wisdom and experience. I don't know. I wish you would tell stories more. That's what I wish, Brad, because whenever we're off air and you tell a story, it's usually the funniest stuff I've ever heard for a long time. I think you should tell stories more. I mean, a bit about what we were talking about before was awesome. Anyhow, moving on. What's the weather like over in your part of the world?
Right now, it's kind of cloudy, but talking about stories, I think that's one of the aspects that I use to be able to get engaged with the shop floor. When I go out to the shop floor, I talk about personal stories, about the stories that you and I just talked about, to get it to understand people a little bit better on a personal level. We all have diverse backgrounds, and people just intrigue me. And so I just love humans, and we all have, like I said, again, diverse backgrounds, and those personal stories really get to a different level. And so, yeah, I really get what you're saying, and it's important to have those personal stories.
Absolutely. It's one of those things. No one likes being lectured at or told how to do their job or anything like that. There are a million and one ways to go about getting information or stressing something. But the best way I've found is actually telling a story and making the point obvious to the person of I won't say the moral of the story, but the point of the story.
Mhm.
If you can do that, people can take it on. And if you can do it in a way that relates to their lives and their practices, yeah, they tend to take it on a lot better. And they tend to actually, believe it or not, listen. This is my experience anyhow. They tend to listen a lot more to a story than they do someone coming down and giving them the sermon from the Mount, particularly regarding safety, which is, let's be honest, never a popular topic on the work floor. But
Yeah, I rarely ever, and I think I've talked about this on previous posts, when I go to the shop floor, I rarely ever talk about safety.
mm,
Um, I build personal relationships, get to understand their day-to-day activities, what struggles they may be having, what improvements they may be suggesting. But I rarely ever talk about just straight up safety. I make it a habit not to carry around a notebook to
or a
make sure they don't
clipboard.
think that I'm auditing them, or a clipboard. I learned that many years ago that people want to have conversations, and organically, safety will come to the forefront because that's the field I'm in. But normally, when you build those relationships, that's when people will start coming to you and start bringing up suggestions or improvements, and that's how I gauge success.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's an excellent approach. Um, Too often we see the safety professional, for one reason or another, who presents the image of knowing better than the average worker or knowing more than the average worker. And that's a way to basically alienate your audience straight away because no one likes to feel, I don't know, small or less than what they really are, which is professionals in their field.
Yep.
All right. Last time we spoke, your daughter had, I believe, if I remember correctly, slightly injured herself in a softball game.
That is correct. She's still doing well. She's still playing softball. She's at it a lot. Unfortunately, I think she's a little under the weather right now. So hopefully she gets better soon.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Brad. Got some lovely questions. I thought up a big few questions yesterday. No AI here, I can tell you now. All right, you are a proponent or appear to be a proponent for New View Safety, Safety 2, whatever you want to call that lovely stuff. But it's been around for quite a while now. It's been, there were papers written in 2000, in 2004, gentleman named Eric Hollingel published a book, Safety 1 and Safety 2. I think in 2015, he then went on and talked about in a paper about how to get moved from Safety 1 to Safety 2. We recently had a conference in Australia, and all the lovely HOP people and New View Safety people were there, some from around the world, some big names. But it seems to be the same message over and over and over again. Is safety new? Is New View Safety still new, in your opinion, and why?
Well, it's all about perspective. If you go out and buy a used car, is that used car new to you?
Yeah.
And I say that because to specific individuals, the information may be recent, while for others, it may not be. I have been advocating for the humanization of the workforce for almost 2 decades. So for me, the new view is not new. But the conversations I have personally, on a personal level with people, the new view, HOP, whatever it may be, is fairly new. Unfortunately, labels or names are often placed on things for the purpose of selling a product.
Look,
New view, yeah.
I brought this up with a guest recently. It hasn't gone to here yet. The one of the things that just worries me about HOP and New View is just what you mentioned, the labels that go with it to sell things. I think the concepts behind it are big enough that they don't need to hide behind gimmicks or 3 or 4 word slogans. And that's just me. I don't think it needs the gimmicky hook to pull people in. I think it should stand both academically and morally on its own feet. And I think if there are products to be sold, they'll sell. I think they will sell naturally as people can see that this is a natural evolution of safety. That's my opinion. What do you reckon?
I believe you're spot on. And my approach, a lot like safety, is I don't talk about HOP, Safety 2, et cetera, within my organization. I bring in concepts, little aspects of the organizational philosophy around HOP, the new view, Safety 2, et cetera, but I don't talk about it within those terms. As a matter of fact, I was just talking to Andrea Baker 3 or 4 days ago, and she had mentioned that one of these days we're going to have to quit calling it HOP. Because what's happening right now in the United States is a lot of oil and gas companies that and I work in the oil and gas side, are starting to implement HOP. Well, HOP is just a philosophy, an organizational philosophy. And they called it human and organizational performance because it needed to be named something, and it stuck there. And it's more about the principles rather than it is the name. And what's going to happen eventually is HOP's going to be ingrained within organizations as if it's something separate. It's supposed to be intertwined within the organization the way we think. It's our in-use values, not, and therefore, it's important that, there's a lot of things that we need to focus on. Organizations must acknowledge that human error is inevitable, right? if we believe in that, that's part of our organization, that's part of our values, then we don't have to call it a name, right?
Yeah, look,
And
I gotta say, you're right. I never thought of it like that, but it's in danger of actually becoming what safety became, a bolt-on to business operations, as opposed to being a part of business operations. Yeah, but it'd be nice to be ingrained. The other thing I get concerned with the name HOP is because human organizational performance, before it became associated with the beliefs of newer view safety, etc., that actually that domain belonged to a particular part of safety design and monitoring and that, which was ergonomics. And as you can imagine, ergonomics as a name has zero selling point, has zero catchphrase, etc., etc. But it's a science in itself. It's actually a science in itself with highly trained professionals. And I think the danger is we're getting some businesses confusing HOP and thinking it's not only about principles, and if they introduce HOP, they don't need any of this other stuff, which is designed by professionals through ergonomics. That's one of my concerns. There are, in Australia, I can tell you, there are very, very few qualified ergonomists, I guess you'd call them. And it's not a popular field, but it's an essential field. And I worry sometimes that the use of HOP has basically almost, in some ways, sidelined them.
It does. I think we must be very cautious about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We can't just stop what we're currently doing and expect everybody to embrace change, which is why I'm an advocate of taking small pieces and intertwining it with our existing processes, focusing on primarily humanizing the profession. Looking at the few fundamentals, for example, like I mentioned earlier, that human error is inevitable, understanding that our organizational processes and systems greatly influence employees' actions. I also suggest focusing on behaviors alone will not influence behaviors. We've got to agree on certain fundamentals in order to move forward, right? I believe we need to become less surprised about human error and more curious about everyday work. Too many organizations are still focused on human error and preventing human error. And to me, I think we need to become more curious about everyday work. And too many organizations are focused on zero errors. And the notion of zero errors are absurd, given the fundamental imperfections of human beings. And as our good friend Clive Lloyd has said, behaviors are not the problem, they're expressions of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, these are principles that we can take, but I'm very cautious about saying that we're going to implement HOP or Safety 2 or safety differently. Again, these are organizational principles.
Yeah, agree. And one of those things about labeling things that it's been there for a while, it's been there for a few years, different ideals in safety bashing each other publicly and sometimes vehemently bashing each other. It concerns me that it's still going on because I was contacted, I reckon about a month ago, I was contacted with a message from a gentleman who said so-and-so on LinkedIn has really bashed so-and-so's behaviorist point of view, blah, 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 blah. And I don't think behaviourists are getting a fair go. Can you put this person on as a guest? Yada, 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 yada. And I was like, oh, I'm happy to talk to anyone. In the end of it, the person didn't want to or hasn't replied and missed the boat to come on. But it worries me that we're, I don't know, sidelining, isolating people because of their point of view. We're excluding them from the discussion about safety because of their point of view. And to be honest, I think all views are relevant. I really do. I think we should be able to have a professional, respectful conversation, and we should be able to agree, I don't know, to disagree on certain things or agree that in certain circumstances, at certain locations, with certain workforces and certain cultures, perhaps it is not one size fits all in terms of beliefs of safety. I think we need to be honest and be flexible about that rather than highly prescriptive, I reckon. What do you reckon?
Well, first, I think we need to assume positive intent in all aspects. It's a crucial mindset that which can, of course, improve communication and collaboration. So developing and sustaining a positive and constructive mindset that values curiosity and openness over criticism can be challenging, which is what we're talking about. Nevertheless, embracing such a mindset can result in just substantial growth and progress. So when we have discourse around a particular topic, and I have a few individuals that will typically reply back to me on LinkedIn, and I take it and it allows me to expand my knowledge and look at their point of view, and it allows me to grow because you're right. I cannot, we cannot, as a society, assume that everybody understands the same things we do. We are all different people. And diversity matters. A diversity of thought matters. And while we may not get a consensus, it's important that we collaborate together for the betterment of the employees whom we are serving.
Yeah, yeah. All right, moving past that because I'm getting depressed thinking about sometimes about the never-ending circle of debate we have about safety points of view. All right, in the last few years across Western worlds, so modern developed countries, we saw probably about 10, 15 years ago a steady decline in fatality rates in the workplace. And, we're all big fans of statistics all the time. But it seems everywhere, not just Australia, but I'll use Australia as the study. 2012, 2018, we had a significant drop in fatality rates per 100,000 workers, blah, 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 etc. But since 2018 and onwards, that decline has basically plateaued. In fact, sometimes you could even say it's slightly turned around. Why do you think we don't seem to be able to, if we're progressing in our safety practices, why isn't the fatality rates across the modernized world continuing to drop?
That's a very interesting story, and the same things is happening in the U.S. From 1992 to 2019, non-fatal workplace injuries decreased by 70%, approximately 70%, while fatal injuries decreased by only 30%. Fatality rates have remained relatively flat for more than a decade.
Yep.
So it has become increasingly apparent that our places have undergone substantial transformations, and it's imperative that we adapt to these changes. To enhance performance, it's essential to avoid relying on the same strategies year after year while expecting improved outcomes. We continue to employ the same practices, expecting different outcomes. I believe our world is a different place than it was 4-5 years ago. But again, I think subtle changes, which we talked about a while ago, have a profound impact. Changing our language and our response, for instance, can yield better outcomes. I do see, and I do believe that many organizations must undergo a paradigm shift in their thinking. While I do comprehend that this is easier said than done, organizations must move away from the notion that their people are the problem, but instead adopt a mindset that their people are part of the solution. And I believe that we can better empower and support our employees in order to get to a better outcome. So I do believe that we have plateaued due to the fact that we have continued to rely on the same practices. And while I get it, it's complicated in the industry, we've got to do something differently.
Yep, I would agree. I would say that we've come as far as we can with the practices we've currently been using. I don't think we're going to get any more traction. It is time for choosing a new path, shall we say? I don't want to say a new direction because but a new path, or at least to try something different. Because if we don't try something different, as you're right, the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It just won't happen. And I think we've got enough data and evidence to show that we're not progressing any further. In fact, a gentleman I spoke to basically said that most of the fatality rates we had drop in workplaces in that period, 2012 to 2018, in his opinion, was largely because of increased use of better technology, taking some of the high-risk work out of high risk. And he was quite pessimistic that we haven't actually learned anything. We haven't actually changed work practices apart from introducing smarter technology. And that's a scary thing. But to be honest, Brad, I sometimes kind of believe that pessimistic point of view. I see the same incidents or very similar incidents happening in the resource industry time and time again. It might be years apart, but exactly the same. And surely there has to be some learning from critical incidents. Surely there has to be some of that knowledge passed on, but a lot of the time it looks like there's not. How do you overcome that lack of learning from incidents?
I think we had to change our strategy. I mean, perfect question. And I think that's one of the weaknesses within many organizations is they fail to learn and truly learn and to improve. But they also look at things like the lack thereof, and they believe that is success. To me, we have to look at it from a multifaceted approach and understand that just because something bad didn't happen doesn't necessarily mean that all risk was mitigated and controlled. I believe that we need to look at and understand that a significant portion of what holds value can't be quantified or measured through conventional metrics or methods, but many organizations are obsessed with measuring things. And regardless of what our direction is, I fear that we will start to measure and set targets, resulting in unintended consequences. When you set targets against metrics, it becomes extremely dangerous because it has a lot of unintended consequences. We need to quit being so obsessed with measurements, because a lot of our measures are not indicative of our performance. It is just not.
That's this whole measurement or taking goals and aspirations, because that's what they are. We want to achieve this. We want blah blah blah. We want world peace, etc., etc. Great target, great goal, not achievable, but was that's kind of that zero harm sort of mantra. And the problem I have, and the worry I have is, it's not just on the safety level. This goes up through executives. This goes up through multinational companies and CEOs and chief financial officers coming out publicly and saying at board meetings, zero harm is our goal and is achievable. Now, they may be saying it because they believe it, but to me, it's almost become a requirement for someone who is the spokesperson of the company to espouse these values publicly in order to satisfy shareholders that they're doing something about safety, or they're taking safety seriously. Do you think that while we have people right at the very top of companies saying that we're going to achieve zero harm, etc., that it is possible for anyone further down the food chain in the organization not to also push that vision as a target?
If I were to, as a manager, as a VP, general manager, etc., after an incident, and if I said, I need to go out there and find out who messed up, that message is going to bias the rest of the investigation team. So of course, our words matter. We've got to push against the status quo. I believe that they say that they espouse those values because they think it's the ethical thing to do. What they don't understand is the unintended consequences of their messages. To improve our current circumstances, we must manage our organizations differently. And that requires us to challenge the status quo, and we have to do something different and sometimes have difficult conversations.
Just wondering, we seem to have been educating workers on the shop floor and educating some supervisors and middle management about, thinking about safety differently. I'm wondering if it's actually a thing that we have to go out to get real fundamental change and actually educate the community too, and change community values about this rather than, isolated pockets here and there. Because till we get people who invest in public companies understanding that, human error will happen, zero harm or zero fatalities or zero incidents is not achievable, we're going to still see pressure on public figures of large organizations to come out and espouse these things, which then again filter down throughout the organization. And, I think it's going to take a fundamental change in basically changing community attitudes to safety. And we've got a hell of a lot of work. We've got decades and decades of teachings to undo, let's be honest, undo. And some of that will take some time. I don't think there's a quick fix in order. I think it'll probably be Brad, I think a couple of generations away, to be perfectly honest. But maybe I'm wrong.
It's going to be different because you're right. It starts from the top. And if we don't allow people at the top to really speak what they feel, because I have talked to people at the very top and I know how they truly feel, but because that language is so seductive and is expected from leaders, they have to say it, they feel. They don't talk about reality. the fact of the matter is, and we talked about that, safety in general is a construct with very different definitions. We can't even agree what safety is. And then we talk about risk. And that's even more misunderstood by the general population. Because if you knew what risk really was, you would understand that zero and risk contradict one another.
True. I got to tell you, I was having a quiet conversation with someone who's highly, well, I don't know, they're quite wise, let's just say that. And we brought up this whole safety definition thing. My latest thoughts are, after being learning from a few other people, is that safety is an idea. It's a concept. And like all ideas, different people think of an idea in a slightly different way based on their circumstances, experience, perspective. And so the idea that when we take this term or an idea and make it into a profession, or we talk about safety at work, it's not one size fits all. It's not a potato you can hold up and say, this is safety, and anything that doesn't look and smell and taste like a potato isn't safety or isn't safe. It's different things. I actually wrote a little article not that long ago, and it was just a bit of deep navel gazing more than anything. And I said, do you think safety is either a right, a fundamental human right that we all deserve at work, workplace safety? Is it a privilege that's applied to workers in modernized industrial countries? Or is it a choice that workers make on a day-to-day basis? If you had to use any of those terms, and quite a few people have said it's none, what would it be for Brad Green?
It goes back to your word of safety. I believe that each employee has a right to work for an organization that manages risk to an acceptable level within the context of their given operations.
Yeah, I think that's a good view.
Again, there's no such thing as zero risk. I want all organizations to plan and execute tasks as if failure is going to happen today. We are risk managers. We are not. Risk is something that we can decrease risk, increase risk. Safety is only observed in retrospect. You're either safe or not safe, but you don't know that until you're done.
Yep.
And you're never done, right?
Yeah.
But there's a catch to that. Just because, again, just like I said, just because you executed a task without any unexpected events does not imply that all risks were effectively managed and mitigated. It simply means that no unexpected events occurred or were not reported.
Yep.
Success and failure are not opposite ends of the spectrum. They're not opposites, but people look at them from a very black and white perspective. Nothing bad happens, you're successful. If you have an incident, you're a failure. That's bullcrap.
Yep. I got to tell you, this whole measuring lack of things, it's basically measuring nothing. You're measuring
Literally.
something that didn't exist, something that didn't happen. How can you measure that? It's a nonsense. It's a nonsense. And the other thing I think about this whole thing, there's a few things. I think we're combating some pretty fundamental management nonsense that's been put out over the decades. Things like saying anything valuable should be measurable. Well, I don't know. How do you measure happiness? I think that's a fundamental thing that we all want to be, but your happiness, my happiness, completely different. How you measure happiness is different than how I measure happiness. I think that's exactly the same for safety. I think it's a nonsense. You cannot measure that. It's just rubbish. But it's been ingrained in people for an awful long time, as have some of the safety mantras. I mean, I saw recently you had a little thing about the mirror bit with the person responsible for your safety. Can I tell you, I am seeing that almost on a weekly basis in industry in Australia today. And we're not talking about stickers that have been there 30 years. We're talking about stickers that have been applied in the last, 6 months. And it's just,
Individualism, yeah, I mean, individualism and behaviorism is very seductive. Shifting the responsibility onto the employee seems like a good thing to do for the employee. Let's go back to measurement. I firmly believe, just like you, that a significant portion of what holds value cannot be quantified or measured through conventional metrics and methods. I gauge success way different than most people.
Yep.
But we are so obsessed with measuring things because we think we have to measure. And I think that's what's really hurting us.
Yeah. It's because how do you know where you are if you can't measure it? And how do you know if you improve, et cetera, et cetera? And it's just like, there has to be a better way. There really does. Oh dear. It does worry me. And some of the when I spoke to Alyssa Lynch last year, she was telling me about in Ireland at university, they were teaching things, outdated safety practices, which have been, outdated for 20, 30 years. And the thing I put back on her and said, well, none of us are getting younger, Alyssa, and, you're a smart cookie. When do we stop complaining about things, and when do we step up and actually start making a difference ourselves? When do we, if the lecturers are crap at uni and stuff like that, or the information thing, when do we step up and take responsibility and say, it's time for us to pass on our knowledge to the next wave? Because, leaving a legacy rather than just complaining about what may be. Now, I'm not smart enough to do that, but people like you are, Brad.
Well, there's a lot of smart people. And, I've had the privilege of engaging with numerous organizations and risk management professionals inspired by the discussions and posts on LinkedIn and podcast. And while it may appear to some that we are only conversing with those who already understand the subject matter, I believe that we are making a positive impact. I talk to safety professionals behind the scenes quite often on a personal level because they're struggling on getting past the old, and I don't want to say old view of safety in the sense that we were talking about, but the old beliefs that we still carry. And I try to coach them on how to make subtle changes within their organization, just subtle languages that we can incorporate within our organization, which will make a huge impact. So again, I believe that we are not preaching to the choir, and I'm very confident based on my conversations on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, that we are moving in the right direction. And I do believe that that we will make a positive impact. It's going to take some time because our world is a significant different place right now. We are trying and discussing so many constructs right now, whether it be psychological safety, psychosocial risk, HOP, etc. All of that stuff will eventually collide if you're not too careful. And there's numerous individuals in our industry that possess the potential to become future thought leaders. And only time will tell who will emerge to pave the path forward. Alyssa is a great example, and I had the pleasure to meet her not very long ago. But people like her and others I believe that they're making the world a better place, one conversation at a time. And that's how I go about my organization. As you know, my mantra is learning and improving through the lens of curiosity. We were doing, uh, we had an unexpected event the other day, and my boss said, I want to be curious and I want to ask a few questions. That to me was success because he had never used the word curious. What I meant was I changed the language within my organization by bringing in a mantra that I believe about being curious in lieu of judgmental. And now my leadership team talks about being curious after unexpected events.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talk about care as a fundamental core value in our organization. I have leaderships, I have employees sending me articles and podcasts and things on YouTube that go over the care factor and care. That to me is what it means. Like, so it's one conversation at a time, unfortunately, and we've got to be able to challenge the ideas and have difficult conversations.
Yeah. I got to say, there's a few things there which are actually good. I really like what you said. Not a negative event, but an unexpected event. Congratulations. That in itself gets a big tick because we hear about incidents, accidents, who's to blame, negative consequence, negative impact event. They're couching it a little bit easier, but unexpected event. That's well done, Brad. I like that. I may use that myself. Dear.
It's all about changing language. Exactly what I tell younger safety professionals. If we can just reframe things
Hmm.
and get people to say, well, why do you call them unexpected? Well, we don't expect to have events that cause injury or damage. People don't mean to do it. They're unexpected. That's exactly what they are. Therefore, that's where we call them in at the, our one of our strategies this year or that we've adopted is learning and improving from everyday work and unexpected events. And anytime that we have unexpected events, we focus on learning and improving. If we can meet those two things based on a group of individuals, if that's what we're doing, if there's corrective actions in there that are not doing that, then we are hesitant to implement. We also want to implement learning from everyday work because we know that we are mostly successful. However, the same conditions are often there when we are successful and when things go bad. Therefore, it's very important to go out there on the shop floor and really understand how work is actually getting done.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned something a few minutes ago, which twigged my memory. I noticed that Brad Green's LinkedIn posts starting to change subtly. I started to see in the last few months Brad Green starting to mention things about psychosocial risks and hazards in the workplace. Okay. It's been the flavour of the month here for the last probably 18, 24 months in Australia. And I don't know, I spoke to, it's like a year and a half ago, I spoke to lovely little Amy Rooser over there. Very, very passionate about safety. And I said, is psychosocial risks and hazards, are they on the radar in the US? I'm going to ask you the same question. Are they on the radar in the US at all?
During our last podcast with Clive, you had asked me a question about psychosocial risk. And I'm going to tell you, unfortunately, it's not on the radar as it should be, but we're talking more about in the fact of mental health. But the reason why I have shifted my vernacular around a little bit is because of the certain situations I'm seeing in not my workplace, but what I'm seeing around the conversation I'm having with people behind the scenes on LinkedIn, where people are being put in precarious situations because they are challenging the status quo. They are being asked to partake in things that they don't particularly believe in, and they are being shunned when they go against the grain. And typically, most of my posts are a result of something that's happened to me personally or to someone that's very close to me personally. So when I see a behavior, or I see management, or I hear about when management treated someone a certain way, that typically triggers me to write a post around psychosocial hazards or psychological safety, risk, zero harm. Those are my triggers, and it's my way of giving them tools and giving them an outlet in order for me to give them a way to speak out without them having to actually do it, because a lot of times people just can't do it.
Yeah, no, that's good, but it's a bit sad, as I said, that it's not on the radar in the US. I may just mention something to you off air about that, but well, I don't really want to mention the next thing on that bit on air, so we'll talk about that a little later. All right. Now in Australia, we're just basically going to have to wind up soon, Brett, because you've got time pressures, I've got time pressures, and stuff. But all right, Australia recently been introduced into federal parliament. Looks like it's going to get passed through. There's this law that probably will be introduced, and it's basically giving workers the right to, they call it digitally disconnect, so that they can't be phoned by their employer after hours. They can't be sent text messages after hours. They can't be sent work emails after hours. They can't be expected to do work after hours. Okay. It's an interesting concept. Apparently, it's been in Spain for quite a while, or at least a couple of years. Is there any safety implications for this?
I believe it is unfortunate that a legal framework is required to mitigate the potential hazards of this conduct. I believe that there will need to be some exceptions for critical roles. I do believe that there are some safety implications. However, this stems from the fact that I'm assuming that they feel that that behavior is creating psychosocial hazards. And yes, you're right, it has been in Spain, the European region, for a few years, I believe. But it's an interesting question whether or not there's safety implications. As I have been called, or my boss has been called, or say certain people have been called after hours in high-risk industries because they need questions. They need a question asked. I was executing a big construction project a few months ago, and I got a call in the middle of the night because they wanted to ensure that the proper safeguards were in place before they went along. And if they were not able to call me, I'm afraid that the choice would have been made to continue without understanding all the risk. Therefore, that would have had a safety implication, a risk implication, if I was not able to be phoned.
Yeah.
So I do believe there's going to be unintended consequences.
Yeah, true. And you're right. It is kind of sad that we're not mature enough in organizations or as people that we have to fall back on the law for this. I mean, this falls into one of those great things that you'd think is common sense, common sense. You don't harass people at home unless there's an absolute need for it. Unless there's an absolute need for it. And the situation you spoke about, there's an absolute need for it. And you can understand that. But it's a bit sad that we've actually feel like we've got to fall back on, having some sort of legal implement put in place to stop that. That tends to suggest that some people have been misusing, I won't say power, but misusing the fact that people can be contacted. And I think one of the things about this is they're also talking about if you choose to digitally disconnect, that cannot be held against you in performance or future, I don't know, your future career, let's just say. So it'll be interesting. But yeah, again, sad that we've had to fall back on something similar to that. All right. Finally, I keep forgetting this because we keep talking about other interesting stuff. You talked about risk and not being able to eliminate risk and people misunderstanding risk. I'm 100% with you on that, Brad. I really am. It's one of those most misunderstood concepts that no activity can be completely risk-free. And that all we're put in place is put in place as people who can manage the risk effectively, so it has as little as possible unexpected events. We'll use that word. Is that about right?
Yes. We want to manage the risk again to an acceptable level in order to ensure that people don't get seriously injured or maimed.
Yep.
We want to ensure that relevant, specific, valuable, and proportional safeguards are in place to reduce the risk as reasonably as we can. That is our obligation of an organization as a society. We have a certain level of risk that we tolerate. And that is my biggest issue with the mantra or the slogan of zero, is that it contradicts the very nature of life, risk. And it gives us a false sense of security when we believe that if zero is the target, people may give you the target. It may not be necessarily true, but you may achieve it blindly.
Yeah.
Therefore, there's, again, unintended consequences to that.
All right. One last question, Brad. And I don't know. I think it's a big question, but we'll see. Considering what we've just talked about with risk, and there's always a level of risk, would you say that fatalities in the workplace, whether it's your workplace, my workplace, whatever, eventually will occur, are inevitable?
Unfortunately, I believe that we try as much as an organization to do what we know, what we can with the knowledge that we know. I believe, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that each employee has the right to work for an organization that manages the risk to an acceptable level within the context of the operation. Therefore, I believe that organizations must have a strict and stringent risk management policy and practices in place to ensure those things happen. But we are not all-knowing. We are not God, and we cannot foresee the future. While I do not accept fatalities or even injuries per se, I understand that we can only predict and prevent well, we really can't predict anything, but we can only reduce the risk to the things that we know.
Yep. Yep.
And while we don't want anyone to lose their lives doing anything, regardless of on the job or off the job, things occur that are outside of our ability. And I believe that there is a higher power that is higher than me that tells us when that time is.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent, young man. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you again. If you ever want to move to Australia, Brad, you can move in next door to me, and I'll just basically come over and have a coffee or a beer or something with you, or a bourbon with you, and we'll just chew the fat. I really would feel comfortable with you, just as someone I could just walk over a few feet and have a chat to. But our time is basically up. So thank you once again for coming on. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
It has been my honor. Thank you. You have a great day.
Too, Brad.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.